MVP, minimum viable product. What does it actually mean? I came across this great image, and you know how they say that an image is worth more than 1,000 words? This image, I find, is the best and shortest explanation of MVP that I've ever seen. So let's talk about that image. I won't put the image in the video because of copyright, but let me depict the image for you. So there are two rows. So what we're talking about is building a car, right? We're talking about a car as a metaphor for a system. We're saying that, okay, there are a bunch of software developers, you as a company, and your customer wants a car. So you're aiming to build a car. Then we're saying that there are two ways of approaching this. Row 1, row 2. The first way of approaching this is what the author of the article that comes with the image calls bastardized agile. In other words, it's not actually what agile is saying, it's not actually an agile way of developing, but it's a common way of understanding agile. It's like some people have hijacked the word agile and use it to describe things that aren't actually agile. So it's a misunderstanding of what iterative product development is. The second way, the second row, we'll dig into both of these rows in more detail, but let me just first mention these on sort of a high level. The second row is making use of MVP. It's a quotation marks proper way to do agile, according to this author. And naturally, I fully agree, given that I'm praising the image so much. But let's start by digging down into the first scenario, into the first row. Right? So here's what the image depicts. Remember that where we want to go in the end is that the customer wants a car. Right? That's the sort of imagined final product in this case. So what happens in the first scenario is that because they're doing bastardized agile, because they're doing what they think is iterative development, they won't develop the car up front at once. Instead, they start by delivering a wheel. So they build a wheel and then deliver that to the customer. So what the image depicts is that essentially it's a series of the product that the team develops. So first it's a wheel, then maybe it's two wheels, then maybe it's the wheels and the frame of a car, and so forth, and then finally it's actually the car. Right? Then there are a bunch of smiley faces alongside this. So the customer is of course not happy with being delivered a wheel, nor is the customer happy with being delivered a frame and a bunch of wheels. Essentially because this is completely useless for the customer. There is no obvious way for the customer to derive value from these partially finished products, because they are not functional in any rational sense given the user's requirements, given the user's quotation marks real problem that they were searching a solution for. So there are a series of angry smiley faces, and then in the end, when the customer gets the car, then finally the customer's happy. And bear in mind, the author of the image says, this is in an optimistic scenario. Of course, in real life, when we're building, perhaps you haven't seen my other talk on E-type, P-type, and S-type systems, be sure to check that out. But when we're building E-type systems that are inherently subject to change and where we don't actually know exactly 100% what we want, in these types of systems, I guess it's more the rule rather than the exception that will misunderstand the requirements and build the quotation marks wrong product. So then we're sort of digging into the whole argument about why it would make sense to do iterative product development at all, right? But so I think you get that first scenario, right? We are trying to iterate, we are trying to gather feedback from the customer and see what the customer wants. But in this bastardized version of Agile, we are delivering parts of a product to the customer and not products that are functional and somehow solve the customer's needs but aren't necessarily complete. The distinction probably becomes easier if we start to think about the second scenario. What's the second scenario? Bottom row. The alternative way, according to this author, the correct way of doing Agile, of doing iterative product development, of delivering MVPs, minimum viable products, or as the author of the image calls them, earliest testable product. Note the difference, right? The earliest thing you can give to the customer so that they can test it and give you feedback on whether that's the thing they want or not. So what would such a scenario look like? Essentially like this. Here's where this picture becomes great. So first image, a skateboard. Second image, a kick bike, scooter. Third image, a bike, a bicycle. Fourth image, a motorbike. And maybe then fifth image, the car. So notice the vast difference between this scenario and the previous scenario. Instead of delivering parts of a product, we are delivering products that aren't as good as the one that the customer is looking for, but they are targeting the same problem. They are trying to solve the same problem that the customer has. So if we manage to do this correctly, then the customer should be able to derive value from these minimum viable products on the way. Of course, the skateboard is not what the customer is looking for, but still, it does help the customer with transportation. The wheel in the first scenario doesn't help the customer with transportation, right? Then the customer would have to build stuff on his or her own, right? In order to, I don't know, put the wheel on something that would make it skatable or something like this. I mean, it makes no sense. So as soon as possible, we're trying to help the customer solve the problem that the customer seems to experience, because then we can actually gather valuable feedback. Feedback about a wheel being insufficient is pointless because that's obvious. So I forgot to say what the smiley faces look like in the second row. So in the first row, they're sort of angry all the time until they get the final product, which is the car, and then the customer's hopefully happy, or if unfortunately unhappy because we've built the wrong product because we failed to collect appropriate feedback. But in the second row, the smiley faces aren't angry. Yes, they aren't happy, right? When the customer's delivered a skateboard but has been asking about a car, of course the customer isn't happy. But incrementally, we move the customer to a state where he or she is more happy, right? Until the point where the customer is sufficiently happy. And whether that will take us to the place where we end up with a car or to a place where we will end up with something else, we don't know. And this is why we do iterative development. It's kind of like that age-old saying of like, if I would have asked customers what they want, they would have said a faster horse. So you have to think about the problem that the customer is experiencing, the underlying issue, and solve that rather than blindly listening to exactly what the customer is saying. And this is what we're trying to do when we're building MVPs and then iterating and pivoting towards where the customer actually sees more value. That's it. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. By the way, the image and the article is of course linked in the description. Check it out. See you next time.